The concordance chamber on the ring world of Ves had been built to make petitioners feel small. Its ceiling vanished into a haze of engineered cloud, and its floor was a single sheet of black glass that reflected the assembled delegations back at themselves, so that every species present seemed to sit above a mirror of its own importance. For 9,000 years, no envoy had ever crossed that floor without slowing their steps, without letting the vastness of the place press some measure of humility into their spine. The human girl did not slow down. She walked the length of the black glass at an ordinary, unhurried pace, a young woman perhaps 26 standard years old, in a plain charcoal coat with no insignia of rank, no crest of house or fleet, no glittering thread of station. Her dark hair was pulled back simply. She carried nothing but a slim folio under one arm, and she looked, as she came, not up at the vaulted haze or out at the tiers of watching dignitaries, but straight ahead, at the empty seat that had been left for humanity at the low end of the ring, the seat furthest from the light. Her name was Ren Ashcroft, and 3 weeks earlier she had been the 8th-ranked attaché in a trade legation that no one in this chamber could have named. Now she was the only human in the room, and the 4 great powers of the known galaxy had come to hear her answer. They had all sent their best. That in itself was a thing worth noticing, though Ren was perhaps the only person in the chamber who noticed it as such. When 4 rivals who spent every waking hour undermining one another all send their most senior negotiators to the same small room on the same day, it is not because of what they hope to gain. It is because of what they are afraid of. At the high seat sat the coiling ascendancy, oldest of the powers, a civilization of long silver bodies that folded and unfolded like living calligraphy, whose fleets had burned suns to slag in wars that ended before humanity had learned to smelt iron. Their envoy was called Threnody of the Ninth Return, and she had negotiated the surrender of 11 species without ever once raising the pitch of her voice. Across from the coiling coiled the delegation of the Marrow Pact, a mercantile hegemony whose wealth was so vast that they no longer bothered to count it, measuring their holdings instead in the number of star systems that could not eat unless the Pact chose to let them. Their envoy, Broker Sol, wore a translucent carapace threaded with light, and every flicker of that light was a price being calculated. Beside them, restless, sat the Thren Dominion, a warrior polity that had conquered its way from a single poisoned moon to a swath of 40,000 worlds, and whose entire philosophy of the universe could be stated in a single sentence: strength consumes weakness, and there is nothing else. Their envoy was the war speaker Ojddu, a slab of dark chitin and old scars, and he did not like sitting still. And last, occupying a full third of the tiers by themselves, the delegation of the lattice, the machine minds, a distributed intelligence so old that it had forgotten its own origin, that inhabited 100 billion bodies and spoke with one patient voice. The lattice did not send an envoy so much as extrude one, a smooth gray figure that called itself simply interlocutor. These 4 had not agreed on anything in 2,000 years. They had agreed on this, that the humans had to be brought into the fold. And so, one after another, over the preceding months, each of the 4 had approached the young human trade legation with an offer. The offers had been generous. That was what none of them could get past afterward when they compared notes in the corridors and the private channels and the encrypted back rooms where great powers said what they truly meant. The offers had been extraordinarily, unprecedentedly generous, and humanity had refused them, all of them, every single one. Ren reached the low seat and did not sit in it. She set her folio on the small lectern before it, folded her hands, and looked up the length of the chamber to where the 4 great powers waited, and she said, in a voice that carried without effort across the black glass, because someone had built this room to carry voices toward the throne, and it worked just as well in reverse. Thank you for gathering. I understand this took some arranging. I'll try to be worth the trouble. There was a silence of a particular texture. Ren had come to recognize it over the past 3 weeks. It was the silence of very old, very powerful beings encountering something they had not budgeted for. Threnody of the Ninth Return unfolded a hand's breadth of silver length, a gesture the coiling used the way humans used a slow, considering breath. "You are young," she said, "to speak for a species." "I'm the one who was sent," Ren answered. "I won't pretend to more than that." "You were the 8th attaché of a minor legation," said Broker Saul, and the light beneath his carapace flickered fast, a man consulting his own certainties. "Now you stand for all of humanity. That is a great deal of promotion in a short time. One wonders what became of the 7 above you." "They're alive and well," Ren said. "They recommended me. I asked them not to." A pause. "But I was the one who first told my government to say no, so my government decided I could be the one to keep saying it." The word no dropped into the chamber and lay there on the black glass, and Ren watched the 4 great powers look at it, and look at each other. And she understood, with a small cold clarity, exactly how much trouble she was in, and exactly how much power she therefore had. Because that was the thing they could not stand. That was the thing that had summoned Coiling and Marrow and Thren and Lattice to the same small room for the first time in an age. Not a threat, not a fleet, not a weapon, a word. Humanity had said no, and kept saying it calmly, without anger, without demand. And the entire architecture of the galaxy had begun, very quietly, to shake. To understand why, one has to go back 3 months, to the first offer, and to the day a machine older than the human species sat across a folding table from a girl in a charcoal coat and could not make her flinch. Ren Ashcroft had not planned to be the person who said no. She had planned, if she was honest with herself, to be entirely unremarkable, which in the diplomatic corps of the young human polity was the surest path to a long and quiet career. Humanity had been out among the stars for a little under 2 centuries. It held a modest cluster of worlds along a spur of the galactic arm that the great powers considered a backwater, valuable mostly for its position athwart 3 trade lanes. Humans were known, to the extent they were known at all, as competent, stubborn, and self-contained. They built well. They kept their promises to a fault, which the more sophisticated powers found faintly comic. And they had a habit, remarked upon in a dozen surveys and never quite explained, of doing things themselves. This last trait had been catalogued but not understood. When a human colony needed a fusion plant, it built a fusion plant, rather than leasing capacity from the Marrow Pact, which was cheaper. When a human world needed defense, it built defenses, rather than purchasing the protection of the Thren Dominion, which was more effective. When a human research consortium hit a problem that the Lattice had solved 4 million years ago, the humans, informed of this fact, thanked the Lattice politely and then went and solved it again themselves, arriving at an answer that was crude by the Lattice's standards but was theirs. The great powers had a word for this in the private taxonomies they kept of lesser species. They called it immaturity. A young civilization, they reasoned, insisted on reinventing what it might simply have been given out of pride, out of insecurity, out of the touchy self-regard of the newly arrived. Give it time, the reasoning went. Every species passed through this phase. Every species, sooner or later, discovered that it was easier to be woven into the great fabric than to stand outside it. Every species, eventually, needed something it could not make and came and asked and was folded in. Humanity had not yet reached that point. The great powers were confident it would. And so, when the humans' position along the 3 trade lanes began to matter more than it had, each of the 4 powers, independently and in secret, decided that the time had come to accelerate the process, to make humanity the offer it could not refuse, and to bring the stubborn little species into the fabric before a rival could. The Marrow Pact moved first, because the Marrow Pact always moved first where advantage was concerned. And they sent, to the Human Trade Legation on the neutral station of Havery, an offer of such magnitude that the legation's senior staff sat in stunned silence for a full minute after the broker's representative finished speaking. Ren had been in the room, eighth attaché at the far end of the table, present to take notes and to fetch things and to say nothing, which suited her. The Marrow offer was this: unlimited credit, not a loan, not a line. Standing, permanent, unconditional access to the collateral of the wealthiest civilization in the galaxy, extended to humanity as a member partner of the Pact. Any human world could, from the moment of signing, draw on Pact reserves to build anything, feed anyone, weather any famine or plague or collapse forever, with no obligation to repay beyond the ordinary courtesies of membership. It was the offer that ended scarcity. It was the offer that made hunger a thing of the human past. The broker's representative, a junior functionary whose carapace glowed a confident amber, laid it out with the ease of someone presenting a foregone conclusion, and then folded his manipulators and waited for the gratitude. The legation's senior attaché, a careful old diplomat named Corvin, thanked the representative and asked for time to consult with the human government. This was correct. This was procedure. The offer would go up the chain, and the chain would deliberate, and in all likelihood, given the magnitude of what was on the table, humanity would find some version of yes. It was Ren who ruined it. She did not mean to. She had raised her hand at the end of the session, during the informal period when junior staff were permitted to ask clarifying questions so that they might learn, and she had asked the broker's representative a single thing, in the flat plain manner that would later drive 4 great powers to distraction. When you say there's no obligation to repay, Ren said, what happens if a human world draws on the reserves and then, later, disagrees with the Pact about something? Something important. Something we wouldn't give up. The representative's carapace flickered, amber to a paler shade. The question does not arise, he said. Members do not find themselves in fundamental disagreement with the Pact. The relationship is one of mutual benefit. But if it did arise, Ren said, hypothetically, a world that owes the Pact everything it eats and wants to do something the Pact doesn't like, who wins that argument? And the representative, who was junior, who had not been briefed for this because no one had ever asked it, made the mistake of answering honestly. The reserves are not a gift, he said. They are a relationship. A world that eats from the Pact's hand does not raise that hand against the Pact. It would not occur to them to. That is the beauty of the arrangement. There is no argument to win, because there is no longer any argument to have. The room was quiet. Corvin, the senior attaché, moved smoothly to close the session and thanked the representative again, and everyone rose and the offer went up the chain as procedure demanded. But Ren had gone very still, and that night she wrote a memorandum that she was not authorized to write and sent it to a level of government she was not authorized to reach, and the memorandum said, in essence, one thing. They are not offering to end our hunger. They are offering to own it, and a people whose hunger is owned will, in time, discover that everything else they have is owned too, because a people that cannot feed itself cannot ultimately refuse anything. The price of this gift is the last argument we will ever be allowed to win. I recommend we decline. She expected to be reprimanded. She expected, at best, to be ignored. Instead, 4 days later, the human government declined the offer of the Marrow Pact, in a message so courteous and so absolute that Broker Sol himself read it 3 times looking for the opening he was certain must be there, and found none. And that was where it began. The Marrow Pact did not take refusal well, but it took it quietly, which was worse. Broker Sol was not a creature who raged. He was a creature who recalculated. And a refusal of an offer that generous meant that one of his foundational assumptions about the young species was wrong, and Broker Sol had built a career, and a fortune, and a hegemony on the correctness of his assumptions. So the Marrow Pact did what it always did when a variable misbehaved. It investigated. Their agents descended on the human worlds not as spies, exactly, but as auditors, as market analysts, as the endless patient census-takers of a civilization that understood everything as a ledger. They wanted to know why. They wanted to find the lever. Every species had a lever, in the Marrow philosophy, a thing it needed so badly that it would trade away anything to secure it. And the art of the pact was simply to find that lever and make itself the only hand that could pull it. The agents came back with reports that Broker Sol did not enjoy reading. The humans, the reports said, had no lever. This was not because they lacked wants. They wanted a great many things and wanted them badly. But they had arranged their entire civilization around a single stubborn principle, so deeply woven into their institutions and their infrastructure and their culture that it did not read as a principle at all, more like the grain of a wood. That anything they truly needed they would learn to make themselves, even if making it was slower, cruder, more expensive and more painful than buying it. Especially then. The harder a thing was to make, the more determined they seemed to be to make it, as though difficulty were an argument in favor rather than against. Their food came from their own soil and their own fusion-lit vats. Their ships were built in their own yards from their own alloys. Their medicine, their power, their weapons, their air, every link in every chain that kept a human alive in the cold of space, was forged by human hands or human machines, in human systems, answerable to no one outside. It was, from a Marrow perspective, grotesquely inefficient. They could have had all of it better and cheaper by simply joining the fabric. And that, the reports concluded, was precisely what they had decided never to do. Broker Sol read the reports and set them down, and sat for a long time in the dim counting house at the heart of his flagship, and arrived at a conclusion that frightened him, and that he told no one. A people that cannot be made to need you, he thought, cannot be governed. Not owned, not leveraged, not folded. They can only be met. And we have forgotten how to meet anyone. We have only ever absorbed. He did not share this conclusion. Instead, he did the thing that great powers do when they cannot understand a rival. He assumed the rival must be hiding a weakness, and he began, quietly, to look for it, and to reach out to the other powers to see whether they had noticed the same anomaly, and whether they might, for once, be persuaded to compare notes. They had noticed, because by then the others had made their offers too. The Thren Dominion offered strength. They did it in their own way, which was to say bluntly, and with an implied threat coiled inside the generosity like a blade in a bouquet. Warspeaker Ojddu came to the human worlds himself, which was a mark of respect the Dominion rarely paid to anyone, and he stood in the assembly hall of the human government, a mountain of scarred chitin, and he made humanity an offer that the Dominion had made only twice before in its long and bloody history. He offered them the shield. The Thren Dominion, Ojddu explained, did not lose. It had not lost a war in 9,000 years because it did not fight wars it could lose. Its fleets were the finest instruments of destruction in the galaxy, and its protection, once extended, was absolute. Any world under the Dominion's shield was a world no rival would dare to touch, because to touch it was to invite the entire weight of the Dominion, and no one in the galaxy, not Coiling, not Marrow, not even the vast old lattice, wished to invite that. Humanity sat, Ojddu observed, athwart 3 trade lanes, in a position of great value and great vulnerability. The great powers were circling. It was only a matter of time before one of them, tired of being refused, decided to take what could not be bought. Humanity's own defenses were adequate, Ojddu allowed, with the faint contempt of a master craftsman assessing an amateur's work, but adequate would not be enough forever. Under the Dominion's shield, humanity would never again have to fear. It could set down the exhausting burden of defending itself. It could, at last, be safe. The price was small, Ojddu said. Humanity would place its fleets under Dominion command in time of war, would grant the Dominion basing rights in the 3 lanes, and would, in the manner of all Dominion protectorates, defer to the Dominion in matters touching the security of the whole. Trivial concessions, Ojdu said, for a species that would otherwise spend the next 1,000 years looking nervously over its shoulder. The human government heard him out with grave courtesy. And then they asked to consult, and Ren Ashcroft, who had by now been elevated from 8th attaché to something without a formal title but with a direct line to people who mattered, was in the room when the consultation happened, and she was asked, because she had been right before, what she thought. "He's telling us the truth," Ren said. "That's what makes it dangerous. His shield is real. Under it no one could touch us." "Then where is the harm?" asked one of the ministers. "The harm is in the word defer," Ren said. "A protected people defers to its protector in matters of security, and a great power can define almost anything as a matter of security, given time and motive. Our trade policy, if it affects the lanes. Our internal laws, if they affect our reliability. Our fleets, our yards, eventually our voice. We would set down the burden of defending ourselves, yes, but a people that does not carry that burden forgets how. In 2 generations we couldn't take the shield away even if we wanted to, because we'd have no fleet of our own left worth the name, and no memory of how to build one, and no stomach for the fear that comes with standing alone. He isn't offering to protect us. He's offering to make us unable to protect ourselves and calling it a gift." She paused, and then she said the thing that would find its way, eventually, into the private nightmares of 4 great powers. "The safest thing in the galaxy," Ren said, "is to be the kind of people no one can make afraid, and you can't buy that. You can only refuse to sell it." Humanity declined the Thren Dominion's shield. Ojdu did not understand the refusal, and what the Dominion did not understand it despised. But underneath the contempt, in a place Ojdu would not have admitted to having, something turned over uneasily. He had seen a great many species accept the shield gratefully, weeping with relief. He had never before seen a species look at the shield, understand it perfectly, and set it down. That was not weakness. Ojdu knew weakness intimately. He had built his life on recognizing it. This was something else. This was a people that had looked at safety, the thing every living creature craved above all others, and had decided that a certain kind of safety was itself a defeat. Ojdu returned to the Dominion and made a report that his own war council found nearly heretical. "There is a species," he told them, "that cannot be conquered by protecting it." He did not know yet what it meant. He knew only that in 9,000 years he had never had to write that sentence, and that writing it had cost him something, and that he would need to find out why the humans made him feel, for the first time in his long life, that his shield was not a gift he was giving but a chain he was offering, and that they had seen the chain, and he had not. The coiling ascendancy offered knowledge. They made their offer last of the 3, and they made it most subtly, because the coiling were the oldest and the most patient, and understood that the deepest hooks are the ones a species sets in itself. Threnody of the 9th return came to the humans not with credit or shields, but with a single crystalline data shard, small enough to rest in a human palm, and she laid it on the table with the reverence of a priest laying down a relic. On the shard, she said, was the accumulated learning of the ascendancy. Not all of it, of course. The whole would have overwhelmed every human archive a millionfold. But a curated gift, a foundation, the answers to 10,000 years of questions that humanity had not yet even thought to ask. Cures for diseases the humans did not yet know they would suffer. Solutions to engineering problems that lay a century in their future. Physics they were generations from discovering. It was the offer of shortcut, of leap, of a young species vaulting over 10,000 years of painful, groping progress to arrive, in a single step, at the frontier. Every species we have ever uplifted, Threnody said, in the soft, unfolding cadence of the coiling, has thanked us across the whole length of its history for this gift. We ask nothing but that you accept it, and that you accept, in accepting it, a certain relationship, the natural relationship of the taught to the teacher. The human government took the shard. They examined it. They found it was exactly what Threnody had said it was, a treasure beyond calculation, and they held a long and difficult debate because this offer, unlike the others, had no obvious blade inside it. There was no defer, no owned hunger, no chain. There was only a gift of pure knowledge, freely given. It was Ren, again, who found the blade, and she found it not in the offer but in a single word Threnody had used, and had not thought a young species would notice. She said the natural relationship of the taught to the teacher, Ren told the assembled ministers. Think about what that relationship is. The teacher knows. The student learns. The student is grateful and looks up and asks and waits to be given the next thing, forever. Because the teacher is always 10,000 years ahead, and the student can never catch up, because every time the student gets close, the teacher hands down the next gift and resets the distance. But it's knowledge, a minister said. How can more knowledge make us weaker? It doesn't make us weaker, Ren said. It makes us dependent in the one place we've kept ourselves free. We solve our own problems. That's the whole thing. That's the grain of who we are. We hit a wall and we break our hands on it until it gives, and when it gives, the answer is ours, and knowing it's ours changes what kind of people we are. If we take this, we'll have the answers, but we won't have the thing that comes from finding them. We'll be a species that looks up and waits to be given the next thing. And a species that looks up and waits is a species that has already surrendered, no matter how much it knows. She looked at the shard where it sat on the table, glittering with the wisdom of 10,000 years. Send it back, Ren said, politely, with thanks, and tell them we'd rather be wrong on our own than right on theirs. There was a long silence in the human assembly. And then, because they were the kind of people they were, they sent the shard back with thanks, and they were wrong on their own, and it made them, though none of the great powers could yet see it, the most dangerous species in the galaxy. To understand the summons to the ring, one must understand the weeks that came before it, the quiet season between the last refusal and the concordance, when the great powers did the thing that powers so old always do before they act. They did not leap. Powers that old never leap. First they probed, and the probing is a story of its own, and it is the story of how each of the four came, alone and in secret, to the same quiet dread, and how each tried to talk itself out of it and failed. The Marrow Pact probed with money, because the Marrow Pact knew no other language. After the refusal, and after Broker Sol's private and unspoken conclusion that the humans could not be governed, the Pact did not give up. It could not. To give up on absorbing a species was, for the Marrow, a theological impossibility, like a river giving up on the sea. So the Pact tried the thing it always tried when the front door was refused. It went looking for the back. It found the humans' trade partners, and it offered them better terms to cut the humans out. It found the humans' suppliers and it bought them, or tried to. It found the small dependencies that even a self-sufficient species inevitably accrued, the trace elements imported from one system, the rare isotope refined in another, the 1,000 tiny threads by which no polity is ever quite as independent as it believes, and it began, methodically, to pull them. And it discovered, thread by thread, that the humans had already thought of this. Every dependency the Pact reached for, the humans had a fallback. Not a better one. Almost always a worse one, a more expensive one, a cruder domestic substitute that cost twice as much and worked half as well. But it existed. For every trace element, a mine of their own, marginal and unprofitable, kept running at a loss for exactly this reason. For every isotope, a refinery of their own, inefficient and slow, maintained precisely so that no one else's hand would ever be on that valve. The humans had mapped their own dependencies more thoroughly than the Pact ever could, and had spent generations and vast fortunes closing them, one by one, buying nothing but the ability to refuse, hoarding no treasure but their own capacity to say no. The Marrow analysts who compiled this finding used a word in their report that had no precise translation, but which rendered roughly as anti-wealth. The humans, they wrote, had inverted the logic of the galaxy. Every other species accumulated advantages, cheaper sources, better deals, richer patrons, and in accumulating them, accumulated dependencies, because every advantage came from somewhere, and that somewhere acquired a hold. The humans accumulated independence and paid for it in advantages foregone. They were, by every marrow measure, poorer than they had to be. And they were, by the one measure the marrow had never learned to see, richer than any client in the galaxy, because they owned the thing no amount of marrow credit could buy back once it was sold. Broker Sol read the anti-wealth report alone in the dim counting house, and he sat with it for a long time, and he understood that his hegemony, the wealthiest civilization in the galaxy, had just been shown a kind of wealth it did not possess and could not acquire, because to acquire it would require giving up everything the marrow was. And for the first time in his long life, Broker Sol felt poor. He told no one, but he began quietly to hedge. He moved certain packed reserves out of the systems nearest the humans. He did not examine why. He told himself it was ordinary prudence. It was, in fact, the oldest instinct in the galaxy, the instinct of a creditor who has glimpsed a debtor that will never need to borrow, and who understands, without letting himself understand it, that the whole edifice of his power rests on need, and that need has just been shown to be optional. The Thren Dominion probed with fear, because fear was the Dominion's currency as money was the Pact's. After the refusal of the shield, Ojdou did not send fleets, not yet. The Dominion's genius had never been in fighting the wars it could win, but in winning the wars it never had to fight, by making the outcome so obvious that the enemy surrendered before the first shot. And so the Dominion did to the humans what it had done to 40,000 worlds. It applied pressure, calibrated and deniable, to see where they would bend. A Dominion squadron conducted exercises just outside human space, close enough to be seen, far enough to be deniable. Dominion agents let it be known, through the usual channels, that the great powers were losing patience, that a species so isolated would find no friends when the reckoning came, that safety was still available but the window was closing. It was the standard overture, the pressure that had brought 1,000 proud species to the negotiating table hat in hand, and Ojdou deployed it with the confidence of long mastery, and he waited for the humans to feel the fear and come. The humans did not come. What they did instead unsettled Ojdou more than any counter-threat could have. They did not protest the exercises. They did not lodge complaints or demand explanations or issue warnings, all of which would have been reactions the Dominion knew how to read and exploit. They simply, quietly, invited the Dominion to observe their response. And their response was to run their own exercises in full view and to let the Dominion's agents watch. And what the Dominion's agents saw was a civilization that had war-gamed its own annihilation so many times, so thoroughly, and with such grim acceptance, that the prospect had lost its power to terrify. The humans had plans for the loss of every colony. They had plans for the loss of every fleet. They had plans, the agents reported with something close to disbelief, for the loss of their homeworld, plans that assumed the worst and went on anyway, plans built around the calm certainty that even the death of nearly everything would not be the death of the idea, because the idea did not live in any world or fleet or person the Dominion could destroy. Ojdou read the report of the human exercises, and he understood, with the professional clarity of a creature who had spent 9,000 years studying the moment enemies broke, that these enemies had no breaking point of the kind he knew how to reach. You could not frighten a people that had already looked its own extinction full in the face and decided to remain itself anyway. Fear worked on those who had something to lose that they valued above themselves. The humans valued nothing above themselves, not survival, not safety, not their own worlds. There was nothing left to threaten. He held the whole of the Dominion's power in his scarred hands, the finest instrument of terror in the galaxy, and he had found the one door it could not open, and it was not locked. It was simply that there was no one behind it who could be made to be afraid. He went to his war council, and he said a thing that no war speaker had said in the history of the Dominion. He said, "There is an enemy we cannot defeat, because there is nothing in them we can take that they have not already given up." And his council did not believe him, and he did not blame them, because a season before he would not have believed it either. The coiling ascendancy probed with patience, because patience was the oldest weapon of all, and the coiling had more of it than anyone alive. Threnody of the Ninth Return did not press. She did not threaten. After the shard was returned, she simply began to watch, and to wait, and to place before the humans at intervals small temptations, not grand offers but tiny ones, the little conveniences by which a patient civilization accustoms a proud one to the taste of being given things. A minor coiling research station near human space, let it be known that it would happily share certain non-sensitive findings, as a gesture of neighborly goodwill. A coiling medical mission offered out of pure benevolence to assist with a difficult outbreak on a human border world. A coiling cultural archive extended an open invitation to human scholars, no strings, no fee, simply the free exchange of learning between peoples. Each gesture was small. Each was genuinely useful. Each was a single grain of the 10,000-year relationship of the taught to the teacher, offered so gently that no one could reasonably refuse it, because to refuse would be churlish, ungracious, paranoid, the act of a species too small-minded to accept a neighbor's kindness. Threnody understood that the great absorptions never began with the great gift. They began with the small ones, the ones too petty to justify refusal, and she had begun patiently to seed them, confident that the humans, whatever their principles about grand offers, would not be able to sustain rudeness against 1,000 small courtesies, and that acceptance, once begun in trivial things, would grow of its own accord until the species looked up one day and found itself, without ever having decided to, in the natural relationship of the taught to the teacher. The humans refused every single one, politely, warmly even, but completely. And they did it, Threnody observed with mounting unease, without a trace of the defensiveness she had counted on. They were not churlish. They were not paranoid. They thanked the research station and shared findings of their own in return, an exchange between equals, giving as much as they declined to take, so that the relationship never once tilted into the shape of teacher and taught. They thanked the medical mission and handled the outbreak themselves, and when it was over, they sent the mission a detailed account of how they had done it, a gift of knowledge flowing the wrong way, from the young to the old, gracious and unanswerable. They accepted the archive's invitation and sent scholars, who arrived not as students but as colleagues, who contributed as much as they learned, who treated 10,000 years of coiling wisdom not with the awe of the taught but with the frank interest of a peer, and who left the coiling archivists with the disquieting sensation of having been visited rather than instructed. Threnody watched the humans decline to be uplifted, not by rejecting the gifts, but by insisting, gently and relentlessly, on always giving back an equal measure, so that no gift could ever accumulate into a debt, and she understood at last what she was dealing with. The humans had grasped the oldest coiling secret, the one the ascendancy had never spoken aloud, the mechanism beneath all their patient uplifting, that a relationship becomes a hierarchy the moment the giving flows only one way. And they had defeated it not with a wall but with reciprocity, by refusing to only receive, by matching every grain with a grain of their own, so that the scales never tipped and the hierarchy never formed and the young species remained, maddeningly, courteously, and equal. It was, Threnody thought, the most sophisticated thing she had seen a young species do in 9,000 years, and the most alarming because it could not be countered by patience. Patience defeated pride, defeated need, defeated fear. It could not defeat reciprocity, because reciprocity did not resist the patient offer. It simply answered it in kind forever, and an offer answered in kind is not an absorption but an exchange, and exchanges between equals do not build empires. They build peers, and the coiling did not want a peer. In 9,000 years they had never once wanted a peer, and they had, it seemed, without noticing and against all their patient art, acquired one. Threnody of the Ninth Return sent word to the other three powers that she believed the matter could no longer be handled by any of them alone. And that was the message that became the concordance, and the ring at the edge of nowhere, and the summons of the young human who had ruined the first offer with a single honest question, and everything that followed on the black glass beneath the engineered clouds. On the night before she left for the ring, Ren Ashcroft could not sleep, and so she walked. The human government had given her a small apartment in the diplomatic quarter of the capital, and from its window she could see the city, and beyond the city the shield towers, and beyond the towers the thin, bright line of the orbital yards where humanity built its ships, working through the night as they always did, because a people that builds everything itself never quite stops building. She stood at the window and watched the yards flicker, and she thought about what she had been asked to do, and she was afraid, and she let herself be afraid because that was allowed too. The Prime Minister had come to see her that evening, which was not procedure, and had sat in the small apartment and spoken to her plainly, and what she had said had stayed with Ren all night. "They think you're the reason," the Prime Minister had said. "The four of them. Our intelligence is clear on it. They've decided the whole thing is you, that if they take you apart in front of the galaxy, they take apart the idea. That's why they want you specifically. Not our foreign minister, not me, you, the eighth attaché who asked the wrong question." She had looked at Ren steadily. "You understand that's a kind of danger no fleet can protect you from. They're not going to hurt your body. They're going to try to hurt the thing you stand for in front of everyone and use you to do it. You can decline. I'll go myself. It's my job before it's yours." And Ren had said no, and the Prime Minister had smiled, because of course she had said no, and had said, "I thought you might, but I had to offer. That's the whole thing, isn't it? I had to give you the chance to be given something so that you could refuse it so that it stayed yours." They understood each other then, in the way that only two people who have grasped the same difficult truth can. And Ren had asked the question that had been sitting under her fear all along. "What if I'm wrong?" she had said. "What if they're right and it is me, and I say the wrong thing and I break it? What if the whole idea really does live in me, and I'm not strong enough to hold it?" And the Prime Minister had done something that surprised her. She had laughed softly and shaken her head and said, "Ren, listen to me. The idea does not live in you. It never did. That's the mistake they're making, and it's the mistake you're making too, and it's the same mistake, and it's the one thing you have to not make on that ring. If it lived in you, they'd be right, and we'd be lost, because you're one young woman a very long way from home, and they are four of the oldest powers in the galaxy, and if it came down to your strength against theirs, you would lose. But it doesn't live in you. It lives in 11,000 names we read out loud every year. It lives in a mine we run at a loss so no one's hand is ever on our valve. It lives in the colony that stripped its stores to the bone for Meridian because Meridian was theirs. It lives in every hard thing we ever chose to do ourselves when it would have been easier to be given it. You're not carrying it. You couldn't. It's carrying you. All you have to do is not pretend otherwise. Go stand in front of them and tell the truth, and when they try to make it about you, don't let them, because the moment it's about you, you can lose, and the moment it's about us, you can't, because we already paid for it and we're never asking for it back." Ren had thought about that all night at the window, watching the yards. She thought about how the great powers had made their offers, and how each offer had been, underneath, the same offer. Give us the thing you can never buy back, and we will give you everything else. Credit for hunger, shields for fear, wisdom for the long, slow joy of finding out for yourself. And how each time humanity had understood the trade and had refused it, not because it was strong, but because it had decided a long time ago on a world called Meridian that some things are not for sale, and that the selling of them is a kind of death that survival cannot justify, because what survives the sale is no longer the thing that was worth keeping alive. And she thought about the great powers, the four ancient civilizations that between them ruled the known galaxy, and she felt, to her own surprise, something almost like pity. Because they were afraid, and she understood at last exactly what they were afraid of, and it was not human fleets or human wealth or a human weapon. It was the mirror. Humanity held up a mirror, simply by existing, and in it every great power saw the thing it had traded away to become great, the ability to need no one. They had all, long ago, made themselves into creatures of the fabric, patrons who could not exist without clients, powers who were nothing without the ones who needed them. They had become dependent on being depended upon. And here was a species that needed no one, and the sight of it reminded them, unbearably, of the freedom they had sold to buy their empires, and could never buy back, because their empires were made of the very chains they had glimpsed, too late, were optional. That was the panic. That was the whole of it. Not that humanity was strong. That humanity was free, and that freedom, once seen, could not be unseen, and reminded everyone who saw it, patron and client alike, of the price they had paid to be what they were. In the morning, Ren put on her plain charcoal coat, the one with no insignia, because she wanted to stand in front of the oldest powers in the galaxy wearing nothing that any of them had given her, and she took a slim, empty folio because a hand needs something to hold, and she boarded the ship for the ring at the edge of nowhere. She did not rehearse a speech. The Prime Minister was right. The speech was not hers to rehearse. She only had to remember, when the moment came, not to let them make it about her. She thought, as the ship climbed out of the yards and turned its nose toward the edge of nowhere, that the great powers had spent months in fleets and the oldest council in the galaxy trying to find the hand behind the lever, the secret behind the refusals, the pillar they could pull down. And she almost laughed, because there was no pillar. There was only a window, and a city, and shield towers she had not asked anyone else to build, and a line of yards working through the night because a people that makes its own way never quite stops. She was not going to the ring to defend an idea. She was going to stand where it could be seen, and let it do the rest, and trust the 11,000 names to carry her the way they had carried everyone who came after them. 3 offers made. 3 offers refused. And the galaxy, which had not noticed humanity at all a year before, began to notice nothing else. It started in the places where great powers whispered to one another, the encrypted channels and the neutral stations, and the long, slow diplomatic correspondences that were the true nervous system of galactic order. A pattern had formed, and the pattern was wrong, and the beings who ran the galaxy were exquisitely sensitive to patterns that were wrong, because their power depended on the pattern being always the same. The pattern that was supposed to hold was this: a young species, rising, needs. It needs credit or protection or knowledge or all 3, and it takes what it is offered, and in taking it is bound, and in being bound it is made safe and predictable and part of the whole. This had happened 1,000 times. It was the mechanism by which the galaxy stayed ordered, the way water finds its level. New civilizations rose and were absorbed, and the great powers grew, and the order endured. Humanity had broken the mechanism, not defiantly, not with fleets or manifestos or dramatic gestures. It had broken the mechanism by declining 3 times with impeccable courtesy to be absorbed, and by demonstrating in the declining that it did not need to be. And so the whispering began, and it had a single question at its heart, and the question was, why? The Marrow Pact believed humanity was hiding a source of wealth. The Thren Dominion believed humanity was hiding a weapon. The Coiling Ascendancy believed humanity was hiding a patron, some other great power unknown that had already claimed it. The Lattice, which had so far made no offer, believed nothing yet, because the Lattice did not believe until it had computed, and it had begun, in the vast cold reaches of its distributed mind, to compute. Each of these theories was wrong, and each was more comforting than the truth, and that was why each power clung to its own theory with a fervor that surprised even themselves. Because the theories all shared one merciful feature: They assumed that humanity had something, a secret, a card, a hidden strength that explained the refusals. And a hidden strength, however alarming, was a thing the great powers understood. It could be found, matched, countered, bought, or destroyed. It fit inside their model of the universe. The truth did not fit inside their model, and so they could not yet see it, and the truth was this: humanity had no secret. It had no hidden wealth, no superweapon, no shadow patron. It had refused the offers not because it possessed some greater thing, but because it had understood something the great powers had forgotten, if they had ever known it: that to be given what you need is to be owned by whoever gives it, and that a people that makes its own way, however poor and slow and painful that way might be, keeps the one thing that cannot be given and cannot be bought, which is the ability to say no and mean it. The great powers were built on the ability to make other species unable to say no. It was the foundation of everything they were. And they had encountered at last a species that had decided, at enormous and ongoing cost, to remain able to say no about everything forever, no matter what it cost. They did not have a word for such a species. Their languages, sophisticated as they were, had never needed one, because such a species had never before survived long enough to require naming. The weak were absorbed, the strong absorbed. There was no third thing. Ren Ashcroft was the third thing, standing in a charcoal coat at the low end of the ring. The panic when it came did not look like panic. Great powers do not scream, they convene. The concordance was called by the coiling, who framed it as a routine matter of galactic coordination, a discussion of trade lane stability in a developing region. Everyone who received the invitation understood exactly what it meant, and everyone accepted, and everyone sent their most senior envoy, and everyone told themselves and each other that they were coming to manage a minor irritant before it grew, and none of them admitted, even privately, that they were coming because they were afraid. They were afraid of contagion. This was the thing that had crystallized over the months of refusals in the deepest strategic councils of all four powers, though none had spoken it aloud to the others until the corridors of the concordance forced them into candor. It was not that humanity, one small species on a spur of the arm, threatened the great powers directly. Humanity's fleets were modest. Its wealth was ordinary. Its worlds could be glassed, if it came to that, though glassing them would be expensive and would prove nothing. The threat was that humanity's refusal was visible. Other species were watching. The galaxy was full of client peoples, protectorates, debtors, students, all of them bound into the fabric by the great mechanism of need, all of them having been told across their whole histories that there was no alternative, that to rise was to be absorbed, that the only choice was which power to belong to. And now there was a species that had chosen a fourth thing, a species that belonged to no one, that fed itself and defended itself and taught itself. And that did it, apparently, out of nothing more than a decision any species could in principle make. If that idea spread, the great powers understood, the fabric would begin to unravel, not all at once, but client by client, world by world. The peoples who had been told there was no alternative would look at the humans and see that there was, and they would begin, quietly, courteously, to say no. And the whole vast architecture of the galaxy, built on the certainty that the weak must be absorbed, would discover that the weak had found a way to remain themselves. That was the panic. That was what had brought Coiling and Marrow and Thren and Lattice to the same small room. Not what humanity was, what humanity meant. And so they had summoned the one human who had said no most clearly and most consistently, the young woman who had ruined the Marrow offer with a single honest question and had unpicked every offer since, and they had brought her to the concordance chamber to look at her, and to understand her, and, if they could, to break her, because breaking her, they believed, would break the idea, and breaking the idea would restore the world. They had made a mistake, though none of them yet knew it. They had assumed that the idea lived in Ren Ashcroft, that she was its author, its keeper, the load-bearing pillar that, pulled down, would collapse the whole edifice of human refusal. They would learn otherwise, but that came later. First came the questioning. "Let us begin," said Threnody of the Ninth Return from the high seat, "with the simplest matter. Envoy Ashcroft, you have refused on behalf of your species 3 offers, each of which would have secured for humanity a future of abundance, safety, and wisdom. We are not here to renew those offers. We are here to understand your refusals. Will you help us understand?" "I'll try," Ren said. "Then tell us," Threnody said, "in your own words why." Ren was quiet for a moment. She was aware of the tiers rising above her, the 4 great powers, and behind them the ranks of lesser delegations who had come to watch, the client species and the observers and the neutrals, hundreds of eyes and sensors and minds trained on the small human at the low seat. She was aware that whatever she said now would travel, that this room was wired into the nervous system of the galaxy, that she was not speaking to 4 envoys but to everyone. She had thought a great deal about what she would say. "You've all decided," Ren said, "that we refused your offers because we're hiding something. A weapon, a fortune, a patron. I've read the theories. Your people aren't as quiet as they think." A faint stir went through the tiers. "So let me save everyone some time. We're not hiding anything. There's no secret. We refused your offers for exactly the reasons we gave you, which we assumed you didn't believe because I can see now that you didn't." "No species," said Broker Saul, "refuses abundance for a reason. It refuses because it has a better source of abundance. That is not cynicism, envoy. It is 9,000 years of observation." "I know," Ren said. "That's the problem. You've observed for 9,000 years, and in all that time you've never once met a species that would rather be poor and free than rich and owned. So you've concluded such a species can't exist. And when one shows up, you assume it must secretly be rich because the alternative breaks your model." She let that sit. "It doesn't break the universe. It just breaks your model. Those aren't the same thing." Broker Saul's carapace flickered and did not answer. "You keep asking why," Ren went on. "But you're asking it the way you'd ask why a lever moved, expecting to find the hand behind it. There's no hand. There's no secret cause. We looked at what you were offering and we understood it, and we said no because we understood it. That's the whole answer. You can't accept it because if it's true, then every species you've ever absorbed could have said no to and simply didn't. And that's a much more frightening thought than a human superweapon." The war speaker Ojdou spoke, and his voice was like stones grinding. "You speak of freedom," he said, "as though it were a fortress. It is not. Freedom is what the weak call their exposure before it kills them. You have no shield. When the storm comes, and it always comes, your precious refusals will not stop a single warhead. Then you will wish you had taken what was offered, and it will be too late, and your freedom will be a fine speech carved on a dead world." "Maybe," Ren said, and the room, which had expected defiance, went still at the word. "You might be right, we might be glassed, we know that, we've always known that. We decided it was better to risk being destroyed as ourselves than to be certain of surviving as yours." She looked at Ojdou without fear, and that more than anything unsettled him. "That's not a fortress, war speaker. You're right, it isn't. It's just a choice. We'd rather die deciding than live obeying. We think a lot of species would, if they ever let themselves believe it was allowed." And there it was, spoken aloud in the concordance chamber, wired into the nervous system of the galaxy, heard by every client and protectorate and debtor and student in 100 delegations. The idea said plainly that it was allowed. The 4 great powers felt the room change around them, felt the attention of the lesser delegations sharpen, felt the contagion they had come to contain leap the very quarantine they had built to hold it. And Threnody of the Ninth Return, oldest and most patient of them all, understood in that moment that they had made an error of the gravest kind. They had brought the idea into the one room in the galaxy where everyone was listening, and they had given it a young human voice, and a face, and a calm, and they had asked it to explain itself, and it had. Threnody called a recess. It was the correct move, the move of a master negotiator who has felt the ground shift and needs time to find new footing. The four great powers withdrew to the private chambers behind the ring, and for the first time in 2,000 years, they spoke to one another without pretense. The chamber they used had no name. It had been built long ago for exactly this, for the rare occasions when the powers who spent their existence in mutual undermining discovered a threat that undermined them all. Its walls were proof against every form of surveillance the galaxy had devised, which meant in practice that they were proof against one another, which was the point. Within it, the four could say what they truly thought, and know it would go no further. "She is not the source," said the interlocutor of the lattice before anyone else had spoken. The machine mind's voice was flat and certain. "I have been computing since she began to speak. We have all made the same error. We assume the idea originates in the individual. It does not. She is a symptom. The idea is distributed across the entire human polity. It is in their infrastructure, their institutions, their pedagogy, their myths. We could remove her, and 1,000 others like her would say the same words, because the words are not hers. They are the shape of what her species has already become." "Then the species must be removed," said Ojdue. It was the Dominion's answer to everything, and he said it without heat, as a simple statement of the available options. Glass the human worlds, erase the idea at its root. The lesser delegations will see the cost of refusal and the fabric will hold. It is expensive. It is not impossible. I can have fleets in their systems within a season. "And every client species watching," said Broker Sull, "will see the four of us combine to annihilate a small polity whose only crime was self-sufficiency. You would not kill the idea, war speaker. You would martyr it. You would prove in fire that the great powers cannot tolerate a species that needs nothing from them, which is precisely the accusation we most need to avoid. The refusal is dangerous because it makes us look like jailers. Killing the refusers makes us jailers, in fact, in front of the whole galaxy." Sull's light flickered fast, the calculation running hot. "No, the fleet is the one move we cannot make. It confirms everything." "Broker Sull is correct," said Threnody. "Violence is the trap. If we destroy them, we validate them. If we absorb them, we cannot, because they will not be absorbed. And if we do nothing, the idea spreads on its own. We have maneuvered ourselves into a position with no favorable move. I have not experienced this in 9,000 years." She unfolded a length of silver, a gesture of something the Coiling rarely permitted themselves, unease. "This young human has done to the four of us, in a single afternoon, what no fleet in history has managed. She has taken away our options without firing a shot. She did it by explaining herself honestly in a room full of witnesses. I confess I do not fully understand how." "I understand it," said the interlocutor, and the other three turned toward the machine mind. "I have finished the computation. May I show you what I have found? It is not comfortable." They assented, and the lattice showed them. It projected, in the air of the nameless chamber, a model of the galaxy as the great powers had ordered it. A vast web of dependencies, every client tied to a patron, every patron tied by rivalry to the others, the whole structure held in tension like a spider web, stable precisely because every strand pulled against every other. This was the fabric. This was the order that had endured for 9,000 years. The great powers looked at it and recognized their world. "Now observe," said the interlocutor, "the load-bearing assumption." The model highlighted a single principle, glowing at the base of every strand, the axiom on which the entire web depended. To rise is to be absorbed. Every client had accepted it. Every patron had enforced it. It was not a law of nature. It was a belief, held in common, and the web hung from it the way a bridge hangs from a keystone. "Humans have not disproved this belief with an argument," the interlocutor said. "Arguments we could counter. They have disproved it with an existence. They are standing there, self-sufficient, unabsorbed, alive, and every client species in the fabric can see them. The belief cannot survive a visible counterexample. A client tolerates its chains only so long as it believes the chains are the price of survival. The humans have demonstrated that the chains are optional. The demonstration is the weapon. There is no defense against it, because it is not an attack. It is simply a fact, standing in a coat, in a room we ourselves chose to fill with witnesses. The model shifted, and the interlocutor ran the projection forward in time, and the four great powers watched the fabric of the galaxy come apart. Not in war, in quiet. Client by client, generation by generation, the belief eroded, and as it eroded, the peoples who had accepted their chains began to set them down, not in rebellion but in simple imitation, doing what humanity had done. Learning to feed themselves, defend themselves, teach themselves, refuse. The strands of the web went slack one by one, and the great powers, who were nothing without their clients, dwindled, until the projection showed a galaxy of small, self-sufficient peoples belonging to no one, and four ancient powers reduced to the size of what they could hold in their own two hands. The projection ended. The nameless chamber was silent. "How long?" Threnody asked at last. 2 centuries before the erosion becomes irreversible, the interlocutor said. Perhaps 3, but it becomes irreversible. Every model converges. The only variable is speed. "Then we are already finished," Ojdou said, and there was something in the war speaker's grinding voice that none of the others had heard there before, a kind of vertigo, the sensation of a creature who has never in 9,000 years imagined losing and is imagining it now. A girl in a coat, a single word said politely, over and over. "This is how it ends." "No," said Broker Sol slowly. His light had gone still, which was, for the broker, the sign of a very large idea arriving. "Not necessarily. The interlocutor has shown us the mechanism. The idea spreads because it is visible and because it is believed to be free of cost, but it is not free of cost. The humans pay for their refusal every single day. They are poorer than they need to be, slower, more afraid. They live with a hunger and a danger and an ignorance they could set down in an instant, and they choose not to. That is expensive. What if the galaxy could be made to see the price and not only the prize?" "You would run a campaign," said the interlocutor. "I would run the truth," said Sol. "We do not lie about the humans. We do not need to. We simply make certain that every client species sees in full what human self-sufficiency actually costs. The famine years, the wars they fought alone, the children who died of diseases the coiling shard would have cured, the technologies they lack, the endless grinding labor of making everything yourself when you could simply be given it. Let the idea spread, yes, but let it spread with its full price attached. Most species, seeing the cost, will decide their chains are comfortable after all. They will choose to be absorbed gratefully as they always have. The humans may keep their freedom, but the freedom will stop being contagious because we will have made it look like exactly what it is. A hard, painful, dangerous way to live, chosen by a stubborn few. The four great powers considered this, and one by one they saw that it was sound, and the vertigo receded, and the old confidence began cautiously to return. This was a move they understood, not a fleet, not an offer, a truth weaponized. They would not attack the human idea. They would let it stand in all its costly glory and let the galaxy's own species do the sensible thing, which was to look at the price and flinch. "It is a good strategy," said Threnody. "It plays to our strength, which has never been force but persuasion, and it has one further merit." She turned her long silver body toward the direction of the concordance chamber, where the young human still waited. "It requires the human envoy to remain, and to keep speaking, and to keep explaining herself. Because the more she explains the idea, the more she will also be made to explain its cost. We will simply ask the questions that draw the price into the light. She has been so honest. Let us use her honesty. Let us make her the one who shows the galaxy how much freedom hurts." They returned to the concordance chamber, the four great powers, with a plan and with their confidence restored, and they did not know, could not have known, that they had just decided to hand Ren Ashcroft the exact stage she had come to stand on. The concordance reconvened. and Threnody of the Ninth Return opened the second session, with the mildness of a creature laying a trap it is certain will spring. "Envoy Ashcroft," she said, "you spoke movingly of choice, of a people who would rather die deciding than live obeying. It was well said, and I do not doubt you believe it. But this council owes the watching galaxy more than fine words. It owes them the whole truth. And the whole truth of your species includes a cost you did not mention. Will you speak of it now, as honestly as you spoke before?" "I'll speak of anything you like," Ren said. "Then speak of the Meridian famine," Threnody said, and the name went through the human delegation like a blade, and Ren's face did not change, but something behind it went very still. 40 years ago, on your colony world of Meridian, the primary crop failed. You had refused even then to bind yourselves to the marrow reserves. And so, when the harvest died, there was no unlimited credit to draw upon, no vast granary of a patron to open. There was only what humanity could grow and ship on its own, which was not enough, not quickly enough. Tell the galaxy, Envoy. How many humans starved on Meridian, because your species preferred its freedom to the marrow's grain?" The chamber was utterly silent. This was the trap sprung in the open, the cost of refusal drawn into the light, with the human envoy herself made to speak it. Every client species in every tier leaned in. Broker Sol's carapace was still and confident. Let her explain the corpses. Ren was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, she did not flinch from the number. 11,000 people died on Meridian, she said. "It's the worst thing that ever happened to us in space. We have a day for it. We read the names, all of them every year for as long as it takes." She looked up the length of the chamber. "You want me to tell the galaxy that our freedom killed them? And I won't pretend the grain wouldn't have saved them, because it would have. Threnady's telling the truth. If we'd been bound to the marrow reserves, those 11,000 people would have lived." Broker Sol's light brightened. It was working. "But you've told half of it," Ren said, "so let me tell the rest because I know it better than you do. My grandmother was on Meridian. She was a child that winter. She lived because the colony next door, which had almost nothing itself, sent everything it could spare, and the world after that sent more, and every human world in reach stripped its own stores to the bone to keep Meridian alive, and it still wasn't enough for 11,000 of them, and it was enough for the other 400,000. Nobody made them do it. There was no patron to command it. They did it because Meridian was theirs, and they were Meridians, and that's what we are to each other when there's no one above us to be responsible, so we don't have to be." She let that stand, and then she said the thing that turned the trap inside out. "And here's what happened after. We didn't crawl to the marrow pact. We looked at 11,000 graves, and we swore it would never happen again, and then we spent 40 years making sure it couldn't. We built the vault worlds. We bred the crops that don't fail together. We laced every colony into a web that can feed any one of them out of all the others in a season. We are right now, today, the single hardest civilization in this galaxy to starve, and we are that because of Meridian, because we buried our dead and then we did something about it ourselves instead of selling our children's freedom to a patron so we'd never have to grow up." She looked at Threnody, and then at Sol, and then out at the watching tiers. "You wanted the galaxy to see the price of our freedom. Good. I want them to see it too. The price was 11,000 names we still read out loud. And what we bought with it was a people that will never again wait for someone else to decide whether we get to eat. You call that expensive. We call it the most important thing we own. Ask yourselves why you thought the graves would frighten anyone. Ask yourselves what it says about you, that you looked at our worst day and saw a lever." The silence that followed was not the silence of a trap sprung. It was the silence of a trap that has closed on the hand that set it. Broker Sol understood first, because Sol understood costs, and he had just watched his entire strategy invert in the space of a single human answer. He had meant to show the galaxy the price of freedom, and the human had shown them the price, in full, without flinching, and then had shown them what the price bought, and had made the buying look not like folly but like the most dignified thing a people could do. The clients in the tiers were not recoiling from the cost. They were leaning further in. Because every one of them had a meridian. Every client species had a wound in its history, a famine, a plague, a defeat that its patron had used, exactly as Threnody had just tried to use meridian as proof that the client could not survive alone, and they had all believed it. And now, for the first time, a species stood in the highest chamber in the galaxy and said, "Our wound did not prove we needed a master. Our wound is why we made sure we would never need one." "You have not answered the deeper question," said the interlocutor of the lattice, and its flat voice cut across the chamber because the machine mind alone had not lost its footing. "You speak of what your species chose after Meridian, but choice requires a chooser. 11,000 of your people did not choose to starve. They died for a principle held by others. You defend the freedom of the survivors by spending the lives of the dead. How is that different from what any tyrant does? You have simply made the tyrant a principle instead of a person. The dead of Meridian would perhaps have preferred the Marrow's grain and the Marrow's chains to your beautiful freedom and their beautiful graves. You cannot ask them. That is convenient for you." It was the sharpest thing anyone had said, and it was true, and Ren did not dodge it. "You're right," she said quietly. "I can't ask them, and you're right that a principal can be a tyrant. That's the most honest thing anyone said in this room, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't." She was silent for a moment, and the whole galaxy waited. But here's the difference, and it's the only one, and it's enough. A person who dies obeying a master dies to make the master stronger. A person who dies free dies to make no one stronger, not even the principal. The people who died on Meridian didn't die so that some human power could rule the others. There is no human power that rules the others. They died in a civilization where the lowest colony and the highest council answer to the same rule as everyone else, where no one is anyone's grain master, where the thing they died for was that no human would ever hold another human's hunger over their head. They didn't die for a tyrant. They died so there would never be one, and I think if I could ask them, some of them would still have chosen it. Not all. I won't claim all, but enough. Because a person can look at their own death and decide it's worth it, if what it buys is that their children get to decide their own. That's not a tyrant using them. That's the opposite of a tyrant. That's the only thing that ever was. She closed her folio. She had not once opened it. "You brought me here to break me," Ren said, and now she raised her voice, not in anger, but so that it would reach the highest tier and the lowest and every delegation between. "Because you decided the idea lived in me, and if you broke me, you'd break it. But the idea doesn't live in me. I'm 26 years old. I was the 8th attaché in a legation none of you could have named a year ago. There's nothing special about me. That's the part you can't stand and can't understand. The idea doesn't need me. It doesn't need anyone. It's just true, and once a species has seen it's true, you can't make it unsee. You can glass our worlds. The war speaker's right, you can. But you'd be glassing a fact, and the fact would still be true on the ash, and every species watching would know it, and they'd know why you did it. Or you can let us live poor and slow and free, and every species watching will know that too. Those are your options. You took away your own others in a room behind that wall 3 hours ago. I know. I know what you decided in there, more or less. It wasn't hard to guess. You're all so much older than us, and you still thought the Graves would win." The 4 great powers sat very still, because she had named the nameless chamber, and their strategy, and their defeat, aloud in front of the galaxy, and there was nothing left to do but let her finish. "We don't want to rule you," Ren said. "That's the last thing you can't fit in your heads, so let me say it plainly and then I'll sit down. We don't want your clients. We don't want your fleets or your fabric or your 9,000 years. We refused everything you offered because we don't want anything you have. We just want to be left to make our own way, and we'll pay for it ourselves, in famines and wars and hard winters and our own honored dead forever, and we will never send you the bill. That's all. That's the whole terror. There's a species in your galaxy that doesn't need you and doesn't want to conquer you and just wants to be itself and be left alone. and you called 4 fleets and the oldest council in the galaxy to a ring at the edge of nowhere, because a thing like that, a species that simply doesn't need you, is the most frightening thing you've ever seen. Sit with that. I think you'll be sitting with it for a long time." She sat down. The Concordance did not vote to glass the human worlds. Ojddu did not propose it. There was no point, and every mind in the chamber knew it. The Marrow campaign of truth was never launched. Broker Sull had watched his own weapon turned in his hand and had the wisdom not to reach for it again. The coiling offered no more shards. The lattice, which had come to compute humanity into a category, closed its projection, and for the first time in its unrecorded age, filed the humans under a heading it had never before had cause to open. Not client, not rival, not threat, but peer. A people that could be met and could not be owned and would have to be lived beside. Ren Ashcroft walked back across the black glass at the same unhurried pace, past the reflected faces of the great powers, and out of the Concordance chamber, and the story of what she had said traveled the length of the galaxy faster than any fleet, into the tiers and the client worlds and the protectorates and the long-bound peoples who had always been told there was no alternative. And on 10,000 worlds, quietly, courteously, without a single shot, species that had accepted their chains for 9,000 years began, one after another, to look at the humans and to wonder, and to consider a word they had never been permitted to say. The great powers had summoned humanity to a small room at the edge of nowhere to find out why it needed no one. And the entire galaxy had learned the answer, and the answer was the one thing the powers could neither buy, nor break, nor bear. It simply didn't, and it never would, and now everyone knew that they could choose the same.